Shalom. We're up to Perek Yudalid. If you remember, Yerav ben Nevat, Al-Pi the Navi, Achia Shilaini, established a northern kingdom of 10 tribes, leaving Rechavam ben Shlomo with only 2 Shvatim, Yehuda and Binyamin. And Yerav ben Nevat became a Baal Gaiva, became arrogant, became conceited. He stopped people from going to the Beis HaMikdash from his northern kingdom. He built Eglei Zahav in Beis El and in Dan, and he built Mizbachos, and Kohanim, so-called Kohanim, were bringing those korbanos to the Eglei Zahav. A Navi came from Yehuda and warned him that his house would be destroyed because of this, and as an omen, as a simon for the Nevuah, the Mizbeach in Beis El simply split, scattering all of its ashes. But Perek Yud Gimel ended with the idea that Yeravam still did not do tshuva. And now we continue the story. Ba'isahi, at that time, Chala Avia ben Yeravam, Avia, the son of Yeravam, became very deathly ill. Vayomer Yeravam li ishtay. Yeravam said to his wife, Kumi na v'hishtanis, arise and disguise yourself. V'lo yedu ki at eishes Yeravam, that nobody should know that you are my wife, look like another woman. V'halacht Shilai, and go to Shilai, where the great Navi Achia HaShilaini, Shilaini means from Shilai. Hine Sham Achia HaNavi, Hu Diber Elai Lamelech Alamazeh. So he figured Achia is his buddy. Achia was the Navi that said, I should be king. And go to Achia and ask him to daven for a sick child, without saying that it's my child. V'lakacht biyadech asara lechem, take 10 loaves of bread. V'nikudim, nikudim are kind of dried kernels of wheat. Bakbuk davash, a bottle of honey. Ubas elav, and come to Achia. And hu yagid lach, and he will tell you ma yi elanar. In other words, the assumption would be that Yeravam apparently felt that because he was a Rasha, Achia would not be too happy for him, so Achia would not daven for Yeravam. But if Stam, a woman, comes and says, my son is sick, the Navi will be mispalel, and Hashem will answer the prayer of the Navi. And that's why it's important for there to be a disguise. But Taz Ken Eshes Yeravam, she disguised herself, Ataka V'telach Shiloh, she went to Shiloh. Remember, Shiloh was the place of the Mishkan for more than 300 years, but by this time there's already a Beis HaMikdash, so Shiloh was destroyed already in the days of Eli. It got resettled as a city in the northern kingdom, but it was no longer a Makam HaMikdash. V'atave Beis Achia, she came to the house of Achia HaShilaini. V'achiyahu lo yachol lirais, ki kamu eina misevai. At this time, Achia, or Achiyahu, again the same name, was not able to see because he was very old and his eyesight was not good. And in spite, so it's making a point that number one, she was disguised, and number two, Achia couldn't see very well anyway. And Afal Pichein, he knew who she was right away because Hashem Amar El Achiyahu, Hashem said to Achiyahu, Hine Eishes Yeravam ba lidrash davar miyimcha el b'na. Behold, it is the wife of Yeravam that is coming to inquire of you about her son. Ki chaylahu, because her son is ill. Kazav v'chazedza barila, you should give her the following message. And then we'll see what that message is. Vayi kavaya v'hi misnakaira. She enters the house and she is disguised as a strange woman. Vayehi Kishmaya Achio es kol ragla ba Pesach. As soon as he hears her footsteps entering the door, before he even sees her. So number one, she's disguised. Number two, he can't see. And number three, she's not even in the room. Vayomer, he says right away, Boi Eishes Yeravam, come forward, wife of Yeravam. I know who you are. Lama zeh at misnakera. Why are you disguised? Anoichi shaluach elayach kosha. I have a hard message for you. I have news you don't want to hear. L'chi imri li'Yeravam. Go and tell your husband Yeravam. Kai amar Hashem Elokei Yisrael. So says HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Yan asher harimosicha mitoich ha'am. I lifted you among all of Klal Yisrael. V'yatencha nagid al ami Yisrael. I made you a leader. V'yakra es hamamlacha mi beis David. I ripped away 10 tribes from the house of David. V'yatnau lach, and I gave them to you. However, lo ha'yisa ki avdi David, but you were not like my faithful servant David. Asher shamar mitzvosai, he kept my commandments. Asher halach acharai, he walked after me in my ways. B'chal levavo, with all of his heart. Laseis rak hayashar b'einai. You did not take over the role of David. Vatara laseis, and you did more evil. Mikael asher hayulefenecha, from any king that's before you. Meaning, I took it away from Rechavam because of the sins of Shlomo, but you're worse than whatever Shlomo did. Vatelech v'taselecha Elohim acherim. You make other gods. You make golden calves, umasechot statues, molten statues. Lahachiseni, to anger me. V'oisi hishlachta acharei gavecha. Hashem is speaking through the Navi. It is as if you have thrown me over your back, right? If somebody has something that they're disgusted with, they throw it over their shoulder as they walk away. Kavyachal HaKadosh Baruch Hu was saying, you have thrown me behind your back in disgust. L'chein, therefore, Hineni mevi ra el beis Yeravam, I will bring evil tidings to the house of Yeravam. Hichrati li Yeravam, I will cut off from Yeravam. Mashtin bakir. So mashtin bakir literally means someone who urinates on a wall, and that refers to a male, and it's a very, very derogatory way of referring. I will not leave any remnant of you, even kind of a bum who urinates on a wall. No one will survive. Otsur v'yazuv, and all of your wealth, whether it's otsur, whether it's closed up in a safe or in a house, or azuv, or it's a wealth that's left in the field, like whether it's inside or outside, all of it will be cut off. Uvi'arti acharei beis Yeravam, I will consume the remnants of the house of Yeravam. Kasher yiva'er hagalal ad tumo. So there's a machlokes. Galal can either mean excrement, meaning you will be as decimated and worthless as the excrement that is left over when everything else is consumed. Or some say galal, the Gemara Bava Kama says galal means a tooth, meaning the way a tooth finishes and consumes everything, your house will be consumed. And hameis li Yeravam ba'ir, and any member of Yeravam's family that dies in a city which has dogs in it, yeichlu aklavim, the dogs will eat the carcass. Hameis basada, and any member of Yeravam's family that dies in an open area like a field, yeichlu ofa shemayim, the vultures will consume it. Ki Hashem diber. So the first part of the prophecy is that all of the house of Yeravam will be destroyed in a very bad way. Now that didn't happen immediately, it'll happen a little later. And the second part of the prophecy is about the son. V'yat kumi lechi lebeisech v'vaya raglayech ha'ira umeisa yeled. It's now time for you to go home, and as soon as you enter your city, your son will die. But interestingly enough, it says, V'saftu lo kol Yisrael. When Avia, the son of Yeravam, when your son dies, there will be a eulogy in which Kol Yisrael will participate, meaning the 10 tribes. V'kavru also, and Avia will be Zeicha to Kavura. Ki zeh levado yavo liyeravam el kaver. This will be the only member of the house of Yeravam that will be buried instead of dying in the ear and being eaten by the dogs, or dying in the Sada and being eaten by the vultures. Avia will be Zeicha to Hesped and Kavura, and he's the only one. Why? Yan nimtza bo davar tov el Hashem Elokei Yisrael bebeis Yeravam. Because this son, Avia, has one good thing, and the only good thing that can be found in the house of Yeravam. Now, interestingly, the pasuk does not tell us what was that good thing, what was the zechus of Avia that he was zeicha to kever. But Rashi brings from the Gemara in Mayin Katan that Yeravam put up guards that would not allow Yidden to go to the Beis HaMikdash, and these were guards that would physically stop people from going. And apparently Avia was in charge of some of those guards at a certain time of year. It was a rotation. And when it was his rotation, he was mavatel the guards. And he gave people the access to go to the Beis HaMikdash. And that was a zechus for which he was zeicha to a kever. V'heikim, now the Navi goes on, that all of your seed will be wiped out. In fact, even Avia, that's a tzaddik, will be wiped out, but Avia will be zeicha to kvura. V'heikim Hashem and lo melech al Yisrael sheyachros es beis Yeravam, and Hashem will make another king. Now again, it's important to note, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not saying that because Yeravam is bad, will be machzir the 10 shvatim to Malchus Beis David. There will still be a Malchus Yisrael because of the sins of Shlomo. But it will not be through the dynasty of Yeravam, it will be through a different dynasty. And Hashem will have a substitute king that will destroy Beis Yeravam, Uma Gamata, and this will even start right now with the death of Avia. V'hika Hashem es Yisrael, kasher yonut hakone b'mayim. Now, the final part of the Nevuah is that it's not just Yeravam that will be cut off, but Malchus Yisrael will eventually be destroyed as well. Now that's going to be much, much later. That refers, of course, to the exile of the 10 tribes in the days of Sancheriv. That your whole Malchus will be smitten, agitated, shaken up, moved around, like a reed that is blowing in the water. V'natash es Yisrael mi'alo adama, that the nation of Yisrael, the 10 tribes, will be uprooted from their land, Hatayva Hazais, Asher Nasan Lavashem, that Hashem had given to their forefathers, V'zerem me'ever lanohar, it'll be like a strong stream of water, a torrential current, will wash them away. This is the exile of the 10 tribes. Yan Asher Asu as Ashereim, because they had their avodah zaras. The Asherah is a tree that is worshipped and planted for idolatry. Machisim es Hashem. Vayitein es Yisrael beglal chatei shirav asher chatav asher hechti es Yisrael. And this will be a punishment on all of the 10 tribes because of the sins of Yeravam ben Nevat, who not only was a sinner, but he was machti es a rabbin. So this is a very, very ominous prophecy. It is a prophecy about the death of Avia. It is a prophecy about the eradication of the entire family of Yeravam. It is a prophecy that other than Avia, they will not be zeicha to Kvura, and their carcasses will be consumed by the birds and by the dogs. And it is a prophecy of the ultimate destruction of Malchus Yisrael by the Assyrians. But nevertheless, in spite of it all, the Gemara tells us that even Achia Hashilaini's curses have some implication of Rachamim, because he describes what's going to happen to the 10 tribes like a reed that is being shaken around in the water. It just moves around. It has no place to stand still. But that's actually a bracha, because the reed never breaks. It's just shaken around. It moves around. It's flexible. As opposed to Bilam, right? Bilam gave us a bracha, and he called us an erez, like a cedar tree. Now, a cedar tree is strong and mighty and beautiful, to be sure. But a cedar tree is not flexible. And if the wind is strong enough, the cedar gets broken. The kana survives because of its adaptability and flexibility. So the Gemara concludes with a very fascinating point, that even the curse of Nevi'ei Yisrael is better than the blessings of the Nevi'im of the Umos HaOlam. But this was the Nevuah that Achia Shilaini told Eisha Shiravam. And the Pasuk says, Vataka Meisha Shiravam V'telech V'tavu Tirtzasa. She returned to their home in Tirza. That's Yeravam's place. He ba b'safa bayis, and as the Navi said, as soon as she crossed the threshold of the house, Hanar Meis, Avia died. But as the Navi predicted, Vayikbaru Oso, that Avia was buried, Vayisbedu lo Kol Yisrael, and Kol Yisrael was able to give him a hesped, Kidvar Hashem, Asher Diber Biyad Avdo Achio HaNavi. Exactly as Hashem had told Achia Hashilaini, this is what happened. V'yeser divrei Yeravam asher nilcham asher malach, and the rest of the story of Yeravam, the different wars that he fought. We don't have to have all the details. Hinam kesuvim al sefer divrei Yamim Malchei Yisrael. So it's very interesting. We're going to see this a lot. There is a separate book. Now, of course, there's a book of Tanakh that's Divrei Hayamim, Chronicles, but that is not what is referring to this, because first of all, Divrei Hayamim does not talk about Malchei Yisrael at all. It only talks about Malchei Yehuda. Apparently, there was another book that's not Kodesh. It's not part of Tanakh. It was a book of history that was called Divrei Hayamim LaMalchei Yisrael, but it's not canonized. So again, the Navi is telling you, we're not here to give you a complete history. You want complete histories? There are other books that give you histories. Although the Tzarena, we actually don't have those books. I'm here to give you the stories that you need to take Musar and to understand what it means, not only to be a chayte, but to be machti es harabim. And the pasuk says, Hayamim asher malach Yeravam esrim v'shtayim shana. Yeravam was a king for actually 22 years over the 10 tribes. Vayishka v'mavaisav, and he died. And Avia, his son, had predeceased him. Vayimlaich Nadav b'nai tachtav. So Yeravam had another son that was Nadav. So now, what we're going to be doing throughout the book of Melachim Aleph and Melachim Beis, and it's going to be a little confusing, is we're going to move back and forth between Malchei Yisrael, Malchei Yehuda, Malchei Yisrael, Malchei Yehuda, and it's going to be especially confusing because their reigns overlaps. A new king of Yehuda will be in the middle of the reign of an old king of Yisrael, and then a new king of Yisrael will be in the middle of a reign of an old king of Yehuda. So they overlap. Obviously, the change of kings is not lockstep. You will get a new king of Yisrael while you still have an old king of Yehuda. You will get a new king of Yehuda while you still have an old king of Yisrael. So it's going to be a little confusing and a little difficult to kind of keep these two scenes in mind. But for now, we're moving away from Yeravam and we're going back to Eretz Yehuda. And the king of Eretz Yehuda is still Rechavam, who is Shlomo HaMelech's son. Urechavam ben Shlomo Malach b'Yehuda. So now we're going to give a little more detail about him. Ben Arboim v'Yachas Shana Rechavam b'Malchai. He became king at the age of 41. Ushava Esrei Shana Malach b'Yushalayim. For 17 years, he was king in Yerushalayim over 2 tribes. Ho'ir asher bachar Hashem lasum eshmo sham mikol shiftei Yisrael. The uniqueness of Yerushalayim is it was the city that Hashem had chosen to rest His name there, the Shekhinah, the Shem Imai. And Rechavam's mother was Naama Ha'amaynis. So again, just as David comes from Rus HaMoaviyah, One of Shlomo's wives, and this was actually a righteous wife, is Naama Ha'amonis, and in both cases the marriage was permitted, because even though the Torah prohibits Moabites and Ammonites from entering Klal Yisrael, that only applies to the men, it does not apply to the women, and indeed both Rus and Naama are called by Chazal Shtei Preidos Tovos, two beautiful doves that emerge from the Tumah of Ammon and Moav. Now, what's going on in Yehuda? Yeravam, we know, was Chaytei Umachti. What's going on in Rechavam's reign? Also not so good. Vayasa Yehuda Ara B'einei Hashem, Vayikanu Oso Mikol Asher Osu Avaisam B'Chateisim Asher Chatu. So it doesn't blame Rechavam, but it just says Yehuda, Eretz Yehuda, Malchus Yehuda, did evil in the eyes of God, and they made Hashem angry more than all of the preceding generations with all of their sins. Now that's saying pretty much, because if you remember the book of Shoftim, there was so much Avodah Zarah, and we are told that this was even worse. Vayivnu gam heim alehem bamais umatsevas v'asherim, and they built bamais, private altars. Now this means for Avodah Zarah, matsevos, monuments, asherim. This is unusual that it's Zohar, but Asherim are trees that are planted to be worshipped. Al kol giva gavoa, every hill, tachas kol ranan, under every tree, they had mizbechas li'avodah zarah. V'gam kadesh haya b'yaretz. Kadesh is prostitution, right? So this is avodah zarah, gili arayas. Asu k'chol ha'teires hagoyim v'sheresh Hashem b'nei b'nei Yisrael. They were following all of the abominations that the very nations of Canaan that Hashem had chased away and destroyed, the Yidden are doing the same thing. Vayehi, Bashana hachamishis l'melech Rechavam, in the 5th year of Rechavam's reign, right? So he ruled 17 years, but in the 5th year of his reign, Allah Shishak melech Mitzrayim al Yerushalayim. One of the pharaohs, his name was Shishak, attacked Yerushalayim. But apparently, strange thing, he was not so interested in conquering the land politically. He wanted to plunder the wealth and then go back home. Vayikach, in other words, he was simply a robber. Vayikach es otzros beis Hashem, that Shishak melech Mitzrayim took the treasures that were kept in the Beis HaMikdash. He didn't destroy the Beis HaMikdash. He took the Otzros Beis Hashem, v'yas Otzros Beis HaMelech, and the wealth of the king personally. Es HaKol Lokach. He took it all. He brought it to Mitzrayim. Vayikach, and among the things that he took was Vayikach es kol Moginei Hazav asher rasa Shlomo. If you remember, Shlomo had hundreds and hundreds of gold shields that he was keeping. Now these were lav dafka used in war, but these were beautiful and they had a tremendous amount of gold. And all of those maginim were plundered by Shishak. And Memela, Vayas HaMelech Rechavam Tachtam Maginei Necheshes. So Rechavam made Maginei Necheshes. He made copper, because copper looks like gold. Obviously, Rechavam didn't have the gold. V'hifkid al yad sarei haratzim hashomrim Pesach Beis HaMelech. And he deposited those shields into the custody and safekeeping of his officials that were standing guard at the entrance to the king's palace. Vayehi midei bo hamelech beis Hashem, and whenever Rechavam would go to visit the Beis HaMikdash, Yisa'um haratzim v'hashivum el ta haratzim. So the way it worked was, Rechavam wanted to be surrounded by these shields. It was like an honor guard. So whenever Rechavam would go to the Beis HaMikdash, the Ratzim, the officers that would run in front of him, formed an honor guard, or a phalanx, in which he would be surrounded by these copper shields. Now, whether this was Gaiva and Kavod, as Rashi says, or whether it was Rechavam was afraid of his life, Maybe somebody from the northern kingdom would want to assassinate him, or maybe from the south, people are not happy with him. Like a dictator, he needed to be surrounded with extreme security. And then they would be returned to the chambers of the Ratzim where they would be stored. So we're not told a lot about Rechavam. We simply have V'yasser Divrei Rechavam, the rest of Rechavam, B'chol Sherasa, Halo Hema Kesuvim, Al Sefer Divrei Hayam L'Malchei Yehuda. So, again, two different books. There is Divrei Hayamim L'Malchei Yisrael. There is Divrei Hayamim L'Malchei Yehuda. Now, here, it is tempting to perhaps think that Divrei Hayamim L'Malchei Yehuda is the book of Tanakh that we call Divrei Hayamim, because indeed, Divrei Hayamim is largely a book about Malchei Yehuda. But it's very, very clear that this too is a non-Kadosh book. Because the truth of the matter is, our book of Divrei Hayamim does not give us really any more details about Rechavam than we have in Melachim. So if this pasuk is telling me the rest of Rechavam's life is in the book of Divrei Hayamim L'Malchei Yehuda, once again, that is a non-sacred, non-canonized book of history that we no longer have. So there were two different books, Divrei Hayamim L'Malchei Yisrael, and another book, Divrei Hayamim L'Malchei Yehuda, and neither of them are the book of Tanakh that we call Divrei Hayamim. It does mention, U'melchama, without giving us a lot of detail, U'melchama haisa bein Rechavam bein Yeravam kol hayamim, that for all of the years of their respective reigns, there were skirmishes, there were wars, really battles, between Yeravam and Rechavam for territory, but they never got resolved. Vayishkav Rechavam imavaisa v'kaver imavaisa b'yer David. Rechavam did die, and he was buried with his forefathers, David and Shlomo, in the Kivres HaMalachim in Ir David outside of Yerushalayim. And again, it emphasizes why it repeats it is difficult to understand. Shem Imai Nama HaMainis. His mother's name was Nama. Now the Mitzudas David says that it's saying this to emphasize that even until the day of his death, he was behaving like an Ammonite, like his mother, in a bad way. Now that seems to indicate that Naama was a Rishas, not a righteous woman, and therefore it's saying that Rechavam was like his mother. But as I say, that is actually Keneged Chazal, that look at Naama and Aminus as a Preda Taiva. Vayimleich, and Rechavam was succeeded by Aviyam b'nai Tachtav. Now this is a little confusing. Yeravam had a son, Aviyah, who's also called Aviyam, but he died, and he did not succeed Yeravam. Rechavam's son has the same name as Yeravam's first son, and that is Aviyam, which is also sometimes referred to as Aviyah.